All right, everyone. Well, hey, and welcome to Full Stack Development with Ember and Rails. I'm Josh Justice, aka Coding It Wrong, and I'm super excited today to be kicking off this new series. I've been using Rails for years and years, and Ember off and on, but more so in the past year. But I'm pumped to be able to get some live coding in to work on it and to share it with all of you. So whether you're catching this live on the stream or in a recording afterwards, I'm really glad you're here. If you're on the stream, please say hello in the chat. I've got it up right next to me, and I'd love to chat with folks and just handle any questions and comments and ideas that come up as we go. So let's talk about what we're going to be getting into today. I have an idea for an app that I want to build, and it's an app that I'm actually going to be hopefully using if we find that it's actually useful. And it's a bit abstract, but we're going to get into that in just a second. I want to talk about the technologies we're going to be using. We're going to be building an app with Ember.js for the web front end and Ruby on Rails for the back end. And here's why. So Ember.js is a full stack web application framework, a batteries included front end framework. And what this means is that Ember tries to give you everything you need out of the gate to build ambitious web applications. So you're not going to be needing to add in things later. Ember should give you most of the tools you need for the most common 80% use case for applications. I find that those conventions and those community standards are really useful because the whole community is pulling one direction, and you benefit from the learnings and the improvements of the whole community. In particular, one of Ember's distinctives, even against other front-end frameworks that have a similar focus, is that Ember is even opinionated about how it connects to the back end. And there's a data format called JSON API that's the standard data format that Ember uses. And we'll find, this is the thing that's drawn me to Ember, even though I use different web application frameworks in my day-to-day work. The thing that keeps me coming back to Ember again and again for my personal projects is the fact that it's just so simple and productive when you have these conventions in place for the data transfer to the back end. So Ruby on Rails is a community that's connected to Ember and that Ember kind of came out of. And Rails has a very similar convention approach to the back end. In fact, Ember was inspired by Rails. So before Rails came around, back-end web development, there was a lot of wiring together and building things from scratch. And so Rails came in with the same approach and really pioneered it of having a batteries included approach and handling the 80% use case and giving you what you need. And so what I would encourage you, if you're not a Ruby developer, maybe you're a JavaScript developer, maybe you're a native application developer, is that Rails can be great to use, and I think that Rails will be the most efficient way for you to create a backend for your application, even if you don't know Ruby. It gives you so much that just a little bit of Ruby that you need to pick up, the richness of the Rails ecosystem will more than pay it off for all the things you don't need to write from scratch. Authentication, file upload, data storage, parallel, offline processing, things like that. So Rails is really great, but you don't have to take my word for it. We'll check into it as we go. And you don't need to use Rails to use Ember. This JSON API format is standardized across a lot of different platforms, and we'll look into that format more as we go. So if you have a different backend framework of choice, you can use that and work with Ember. But one thing I'd encourage you is if you're just a front-end developer, I say just as though I don't mean to suggest that that's small, front-end development is really hard and is really complex, and it's where a lot of the cool innovation is happening lately. So I'm excited to be moving into front-end development now. But if you haven't ever done any back-end development before, you may feel kind of limited in the kind of applications you can build. And so one of the things I want to encourage you from this series is that you can be a full-stack application developer. When you're not using low-level frameworks that require you to build a bunch yourself, but you're using high-level frameworks like Ember and Rails that let you stay focused on your application's needs, you can build the front end to the back end. And these frameworks are set up for individuals and small teams to really make a difference and build something cool. And that's what I'm looking to do here, and I hope you'll join me as well. Looking over at the chat, Ben has said hello already, so hello, Ben. GN Fisher MBD. It's a JSON API. Every time I have to say it, I hate myself a little. Yes, JSON API is a challenging name to describe, and so luckily they've changed the branding of how they type it out to help a little bit, but it's challenging. So we'll flesh out more of what JSON API is as we go in future sessions. Today what we're going to be doing is just setting up the basics of our Ember application and our Rails application. And we're actually, before we write we got a little tiny bit of hello world code, but before we write any actual business features, we're going to go ahead and get it deployed to production. We're going to get the tests running on a continuous integration, and we're going to get automatic checking of dependencies to get them up to date. And so let's talk about why that is. When you take an agile development process, like I like to take, The idea is you don't want to separate things out into phases so that you have a bunch of local development and later you have a couple weeks or a month of trying to get to production. You want to get to production as soon as possible. And this can be really motivating for personal projects and side projects like I have, because then you have something that's actually useful for you and others as you go. Again, we're only going to have a hello world today, so that's not very useful, but we're going to send our applications all the way to production, and so that's really cool. And maybe some of these tools you haven't looked at before are going to be useful. So I've actually built little project scaffolding tools that I use for both Ember and Rails because of my wiring and tend to create a lot of projects. So the first one is called API Up. And you'll see links to all of these in the stream notes or in the recording notes. So API Up will create a new Rails API pre-configured for JSON API and a certain kind of authentication, and we'll dig into all of these things later. I'm not going to walk through all the details of these project spinner-uppers now. Some of what they're going to give us today is the configuration is already ready for all these other tools we're integrating with. But API Up will spin up an API for you in Rails, and Ember Up is going to spin up an Ember project for you with just a few extra dependencies that I like, and we'll show you why. So let's get started with those. I've installed these already. If you want to use these for a project of yours, you can install API Up and Ember Up locally. And so now I'm just going to create a folder for my project. I need to tell you what the project is, so let's do that. So it's kind of esoteric. I didn't want to just do a standard to-do list or anything like that. I want to make something that's actually going to be useful for me, so we'll see if it's useful for you as well. Whether it is or not, you'll get a good feel for Ember and Rails, but let's talk about it. So here's a quote that I like from a book. We're not going to get into the details of the quote, but I love reading and watching talks and learning. And so here's a quote that I found that's really helpful. I'll read it for you on the stream here. This will be great. So this is a book by Sandy Metz called Practical Object-Oriented Design. It's a huge, amazing book about software design. And it says, unfortunately, something will change. It always does, referring to your projects. The customers didn't know what they wanted. They didn't say what they meant. You didn't understand their needs. You've learned how to do something better. Even applications that are perfect in every way are not stable. The application was a huge success. Now everyone wants more. Change is unavoidable. It is ubiquitous, omnipresent, and inevitable. And this quote is actually going to inform our process, but the reason I'm bringing this up is this is a really great quote, and it brings up this great idea that I really love and really value. You could say the reason software design is necessary, so focusing on your software design, is because change is inevitable. So this is the kind of idea that I love learning about and thinking about and reading about in different books and conference talks and things like that. So I want a way to keep track of these ideas when I find them. I have a terrible memory, and so I could just take notes from the book, Practical Object-Oriented Design, in a big notes file, but that doesn't help me get back to these ideas easily. And sometimes I find ideas that are represented in multiple different sources. So I want some kind of database that's going to track these ideas like this and connect them together, because I'm a nerd like that, and I want to have a way to kind of track my thoughts and put them together. So what we're going to be building together is an ideas database, a way to track ideas like this one that you find, for whether about software or about any topic, and they'll be able to point back to sources that you found them from. And maybe over time we're going to iterate. I mean, this is an agile process. I have not planned out all the features that I want in this application. This is the idea that I want, and using a high-level framework like Ember and Rails are going to allow me to experiment and iterate and find out if I can make something that's really useful to me. So ideas is going to be the name of the application we're building. And maybe that summary of it doesn't make sense. Starting next week, we're going to get into the more of kind of fleshing out the initial version of it. But for right now, I just wanted to explain that's why I'm calling this directory ideas. So, I've already got an ideas folder. I've already created them, so let me remove those. It'll take just a second to remove these. Maybe I'll split my editor here and get started. Oh, there we go, we're set. Okay. So now I've got an empty ideas folder. So I can use API Up, my tool, to create a new Rails API. And at the moment, I'm just going to call it ideas. And so this is going to start off the Rails process to just initialize this project with a bunch of configuration. I think I'm going to go ahead and, oops, I'm resizing the window here, aren't I? Well, this font's a little bit smaller on this side. That's kind of weird. But I'm going to go ahead into App Ideas, and I'm going to do Ember Up. I guess I can't really call it ideas, can I? Maybe I'll wait for Rails to finish. That's a good. Let me get my window resized. Now I'm going to talk a bit about the philosophy here as we go. There we go. All right. So as we initialize this Rails application and this Ember application, they're going to be in two different folders, and they're actually going to be deployed separately. So this is a common practice. Sometimes you combine your front end and your back end into one code deployment. One of my side projects, I have it set up that way. But sort of the default way to do it is to have a server rendered API live in one place. And then your front end, your web front end, is just one client. You might have, I might add native application clients in the future as well. And so those would be just different additional clients. And so by separating these out, it allows us to use tools that are really specialized for API deployment or for static, rich front-end application deployment as well. So that's going to be useful. So in here, there's a bunch of steps are kind of flying by. We don't need to understand too many of those, but this is getting our Rails API set up. Now, Rails originated for server-rendered web apps before there was really JavaScript web apps to speak of, but Rails also has, since version 5, and before that, but has become official in version 5, some really great features for APIs, JSON-based APIs or other kind of formats. So that's going to be great for us. So this has just been created. We have this ideas folder, but now I'm going to read, this is given the project the name ideas, but now I'm going to move the folder to API. And the reason I do that is now within the application, as it's been initialized, the name ideas is all throughout there. But then I'm going to do Ember up, call this project ideas as well, and then I'm going to move that into an Ember folder. So both Rails and Ember have tools built in to initialize projects very easily. My tools here just add in some additional conventions that I take on top of them. And let me just make sure this doesn't run too slowly. Let me talk through, I'll just buy myself some time here by talking through some of the tools we're going to be using. Because I guess I could have initialized this project before the stream, but I didn't this time. So, let's talk about some of the tools we're going to be using. Heroku is the application we're going to use to deploy our Rails application. It's great for server-side applications. It originated in the Ruby world, like a lot of the things that I talk about, but it can run any of many different kinds of applications now, and it supports Docker and things like that. So our API, like this other API, is going to live on Heroku. Then for the front end, we're going to be using Netlify. So Netlify hosts static sites as well as front end applications that involve just JavaScript that's built. And both Heroku and Netlify have free options that are going to be useful for us at this level of the scale of just a hobby project that we're doing. So that's going to be really nice, and I'd encourage you to check both of them out for your personal projects as a way to get started. And as you can see, as they advertise here, you can deploy your site in seconds. So I'm going to go ahead and get logged into Netlify, so I'm ready to go. Heroku has got me logged in already. Let me just make sure my antivirus software isn't keeping us going too slowly here or anything like that. Yarn is installing our dependencies for Ember. So the other thing we're going to be using is called Dependabot, and Dependabot will keep your dependencies up to date. So it will check all the other libraries that your application depends upon, and it will actually submit PRs to your GitHub repo automatically when it finds an update. And when you have test coverage in your application, those tests will automatically run integrated with CircleCI, and that's going to help you confirm that in your PR that things are still working. And I use this for all my personal projects now. It's really, really great. If you've ever experienced the pain of having your application run far, far out of date and having to manually update the dependencies and figure out what works and what's breaking, having it happen automatically one PR at a time is really fun. I mean, maybe I'm weird, but it's fun, it kind of gamified to wake up every morning, pull up my phone first thing, and see PRs that have come in for updates to my app, see the tests that are passing, and merge them down. Makes me feel very professional in my side web apps that I get to work on an hour a day or less, things like that. So definitely encourage it for enterprise work and professional work as well. But yeah, it's just so cool that there's so many free applications that are out there. I realized I could probably actually get going on Rails stuff. Let me just try to get my windows zoomed in. So let's get going on our Rails stuff in the meantime. Another thing is, I'm not going to mainly be focusing this stream series on just I'm going to explain things and make sure things make sense, but I'm not going to be focusing on like a kind of a fabricated setup that's good for teaching. I'm really going to be focusing on building out this real application that I want to build. So some of the things, hopefully it's not too much of a fire hose of information or anything like that, but we're going to be building a real application the way I do it for my personal project and kind of the way I do it for my consulting professional projects as well. So we have our Rails application here. We have our Git status, so it's gone ahead and committed things to Git, and my API app application has sort of had individual commits as all these other things have been added into here as well. So that's nice. We're going to open things up in the Atom text editor. Let's see here, close things out. I do use Visual Studio Code for some JavaScript stuff, but since we're going to be doing Ruby code and JavaScript code, I'm going to be using Atom here, and it has great tools for both of them. So this is yet another thing that you can kind of try out if you haven't seen it before. So let's see what our font size is like in here, if it's big enough or small enough. So we've got a Rails application. And I've got a README that's pre-populated that tells you the steps you can go through to use it and get stuff done. So let's just kind of get started quickly and get our application going. I'm going to zoom in here, open up a console within Atom, and then I'm just going to do, I assume that README is going to describe to me what to do. Rails server. Yeah, so you can just run Rails server or Rails S to start up the application locally for you. And of course, these tools have instructions for where to go to install tools like Rails and Ember globally on your system and things like that. I'm not getting into those low-level details here. You can check out the websites for these tools or find other tutorials, but we want to move on to this production app because we're going to have enough to do for project setup. So while Rails server is starting up, let's check out Yarn, see how it's doing. Kicking off a project can be a good time to kind of get some coffee while all these processes are running. And I will say, if you haven't used Rails or Ember before, it could be a little overwhelming to see both of these things happening at once. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you try to learn them both at once, but one or the other, pick them up and check them out and see what you think. So Rails is running on port 3000, so we can open port localhost 3000 in our browser. It takes just a second to load up, especially because I'm doing so many things at once. And it says, yay, you're on Rails. With the latest Ruby, the latest Rails, we're good to go. So this is very useful. We are going to want to do one more thing before we push this up to production. I know, it's been so long before we push this up to production. We want to do one tiny thing before we push Rails up to production. And the reason why is this welcome page shows up locally, but not when you're running in production mode. So we want some kind of information that'll show up in production mode so we can see what's going on. So what we're going to do, I actually just realized I'm going to do this a bit differently than I spec'd out in my little cheater notes here, so we'll see how that works. What I'm going to do is go into here and create a new route that's just kind of for the root of our application that shows a hello world message. So let's go into here. I think it's config routes is where you go to configure the routes for your application. And you can say route to, let's say pages welcome. So we're going to make a welcome page that displays. And it's not actually going to be a page in this case, but that's okay. We're going to create a new controller, pagescontroller.rb. And don't worry too much about the details of these. As we go and build out like the more typical parts of our application in future weeks, I'll explain more as we're going and link you to other resources. Right now, I'm just kind of getting some Hello World content in there. So if you're following along, you can just watch what's going on. So we're going to create a class called pagesController. And then we're going to create an action. Oh, actually, we're not going to create an action. Just having pagesController there is going to let us render some views. And then we're going to create a view in a folder called pages. And we called it welcome. Welcome.html.erb. Hello Rails. All right, so now I think we should be ready with our hello world message. If we reload this page, it says undefined method make response. Oh yeah, I need to inherit from something in here. This comes from application controller. Now when I reload this page, we get hello Rails. So this is great. We've custom coded this trivial hello message in, so this will show up in production as well. So let's just commit this. Add hello world message. And now we're good. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a GitHub repository for these apps, and it's going to be open source. So in future weeks, you're going to be able to see the code. You'll be able to see the code. I'm going to make pull requests for each week's worth of work, and so you'll be able to see those and browse along and make suggestions if you like, or just check these out anytime in the future. But so there is a command line tool for working with GitHub, and it's called Hub. So hub.github.com. So it is the extension to command line Git that helps you do everyday GitHub tasks without ever leaving the terminal. And it's extremely efficient. So I can just do hub create, and I think I'm going to give it a name because the name doesn't quite match the name of the folder or the project. And I'm going to call it Ideas API, because the Rails part is the API, and then the other part is Ideas Ember or maybe Ideas Frontend. So hub create Ideas API. I'm already logged into GitHub. So now it's created this URL, github.com/coding it wrong, that's me, /ideas.api. Then I'm going to use one of my terminal shortcuts to push this branch up to master. to push it up there. Now the code is there, and now I can do hub browse to open this page in the browser. It opens it up, and it shows me that all the code is pushed up and configured. I haven't described my app here in the README. We can do that a bit later, but the code is up there and ready to go. So cool, we've created our Rails project, we've gotten it running. I'll probably close it down here from local. Now let's check and see how Ember is doing. Okay, Ember says it's done, so we'll move the directory again, ideas to Ember. And now we'll open this in Atom as well. Open it up here. We've got the files open by default just because I've had projects at this folder open before. We see our Ember app with a README describing things. Again, a README copied and pasted and describing what you can do. So let's pull this up. And actually, I just remembered for future week, editor extensions config. I'm going to talk about in a future week some editor extensions and configuration that help with these tools. So that'll be really fun. But I haven't prepared those thoughts yet, so let's not do it. So in here, as you can see, the setup script will already have run yarn install, but we can just run Ember serve. It's a bit of an inconsistency. It's Rails server, but Ember serve, but there's shortcuts you can use anyways. So we'll boot up our Ember application here. And in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and push it up to GitHub as well. So I'm just going to open up another terminal here in Atom. So do hub create ideas Ember. It's going to open it up there and push it up. Hub browse. So ideas Ember opens up, and again we've got it all pushed up with the files, and then we got the README there ready to go. So our application is there. It's still starting up. I'll give it a second to go. So once this is done, we're going to move straight forward to deployment, and we can jump into it. So come on, Ember serve, let's do it. I don't have to parallelize this too much. I could have prepared this in advance, but that's okay. You can fast forward if you're watching on the recording. So what are we going to jump into after this? So once the apps are running, we've added them to the source controller. We're going to deploy after that to Netlify and to Heroku. So that's going to be great. Okay, cool. So now the app is up and running on port 4200. That's the Ember default. So let's open that one. Localhost 4200. And now we have welcome to Ember. They have a welcome message, and that one is going to go to production, so that's fine. And so although both of these, just in case it's confusing to anyone who hasn't done full stack development before, both of these are just showing welcome messages now, but we would not be hitting the Rails application directly in the future. It would be the API. It would just serve up JSON data to be available to our Ember application. The Ember application is what we'd be hitting directly in production. So that's the difference there, and you'll see that more in future weeks. Okay, so our Ember app is up and running, and it's pushed up. So now we've finished creating both of our applications and pushed them up to GitHub. So now let's get into deployment. So for Heroku has some command line tools. And so we're going to set this up. We've switched back over to the API here. And so Heroku also works on the command line. And for this, you say Heroku create. And now we're going to give the application a name. And so I'm going to say CIW for coding it wrong, CIW.-ideas. That'll be the name of our applications that we're going to create here. And this is going to register it for us, unless I forgot to unregister it earlier when I did it. Cool, and it's done. I mean, that was that quick. And it's told me that my URL is going to be ciwideas.herokuapp.com, and then here's a git remote. So you can put custom URLs and domains onto apps. Maybe I'm going to make a note about that, about custom domains in the future. We'll do that some future week. But for now, it's totally fine to run on herokuapp.com, and you don't need, for a hobby project, you don't need to pay any money to get a custom domain unless you want to. But so the way Heroku works is that it's actually added this git remote, and we do, by default, we do git pushes to deploy to Heroku. So if we do git remote -v, we can see I have this origin remote, which is GitHub, where our stuff is stored, and then this remote named Heroku. And so the way you deploy to Heroku is you say git push Heroku master. I'm going to expand my terminal here. This is going to push stuff up there, but Heroku is more than just a Git repository. It also sees changes you push up and acts on them. So we say here, it says Ruby app detected. So actually, we didn't need to do any configuration whatsoever for Heroku, for Ruby, and for Rails, because Heroku came out of that community. So they auto-detect a bunch of stuff. So we're installing dependencies on there. This could take a little while, so I might kick off Netlify as well. So yeah, let's come back to Heroku in a minute when that finishes. Netlify, and there's probably a way to do Netlify from the command line as well, but a default way to use Netlify is to create a new site through the web interface. So once you register for a free Netlify account or sign up with your GitHub account, you can create a new site from Git. So we're going to connect to a Git provider. We're going to say GitHub. It's going to pop up a little permission thing and confirm that I've already given it permission. Now it's going to see all of my repos. And I can say ideas. Search for ideas here. Doop-a-doop-a-doo. Ideas API, ideas Ember. So ideas Ember is what I want to deploy to Netlify for the front end. And when I click on it, it's actually detected that this is an Ember application. And so it puts in the correct build command, the correct directory to deploy from. So what Netlify will do by default is it'll run a build command for you, whether it's Ember or Vue or Jekyll or whatever you want, and then it'll take a directory of files that are produced and deploy those to its CDN. So that's what we want. That actually just works just fine for Ember. So we're going to click deploy site and just get this thing started. So it says the site deploy is in progress. So we can, clicking through here or clicking through here, we can watch this deploy. And we've got a little terminal coming out here so we can see it's installing Yarn and running processes and things like that. So while we're just parallel processing all of this stuff, let's switch back over and check on Rails. Okay, so it says that it finished. Yep. And so verifying done, and it says this URL was deployed to Heroku. I think I can actually do Heroku open. Is that the correct command? To open it in the browser? Yes, it does. So it opens up. It pulls up the URL, it entered ciwideas.herokuapp.com, and it's got an application error. I think I know what it is. So, but let's check the logs to see. And that's really nice that Heroku actually puts the logs on here. So from your command line, you can connect to Heroku to see how it's running your code. So we run Heroku logs tail to follow along in real time. And as we scroll up, it says app crashed. So let's check it out. Using the default web server. Starting process, bin Rails, no such file or directory. So that's really weird, as these things often happen. It's the thing that I tested on my own did not work in this case automatically. So that's very strange. Starting server. I would have thought that it would have been the server application, the server problem. Oh, setting database URL. Yeah, that's what's failed for me in the past. So let's just give this a try and see. We can close this out. Heroku run Rails db migrate, just in case that's the case. This will be a command I'll explain more in a future time, but this sets up the database. GN Fisher MVD said, did you generate bin stubs? Yeah, I think my setup script has done that in the past, and so that has worked. I might have misconfigured something. Oh, you know what? I committed some changes to my template and I didn't test them. So let's... Let me reload the application here and see. You always got to retest everything before you do the live stream. Okay, got our application error here. So I'm going to actually test locally. Bin Rails. Running the same command that Heroku is running, and I might get an error locally. No, that does run locally. So let me check my... Oh, wait. It didn't fully succeed, though. Bin Rails S for server. With troubleshooting. Works locally, but yeah, let me retry that command. I'm gonna actually open up in apps. I'm gonna open up API up and see what I've messed up. This is live, this ain't rehearsed. So there's a command I updated to try to make things go smoother, and that's usually where problems can happen. So and maybe we could even dig through this script in the future to kind of see how it works. Template. Let's try bundle bin stubs Rails to see if I update my bin stub, if that's going to fix it. Well, this might need to get fixed offline. This is one of the challenges of working in a language and ecosystem you're not familiar with. I'm familiar with Rails, and these things can still happen. So if you're not, it can be challenging. So project setup can take a little work. So we'll come back to that in a little bit later. Let's see how Netlify is doing. And it says site is live, finished processing, so that's a good sign. So let's see about Ember. Publish deploy. So we'll go back. It's giving me a random name for this Netlify site, so let's go ahead and change the application name before we do anything else. Overview, domain settings, add custom domain. Oh, not custom domain. I want to change site name, Elegant Swartz, to CIW Ideas. So CIWideas.netlify.com is going to be the front end in Ember, and CIWideas.herokuapp.com is going to be the back end in Rails. So we change this. I think it's ready immediately, so that's nice. And I can click on the link here, CIW Ideas. And welcome to Ember. So Ember is up and running. I think we have the Ember tools here. They might, oh, what's new in Ember Inspector? Very nice. So yeah, actually our application is coming up. It's detected an Ember application and everything, so we're good to go. So Ember has been successfully deployed. I think I'm going to troubleshoot the Rails deployment afterwards. I'll make a note in the future stream to figure out what went wrong there. So it's always good to be humbled a little bit by something going wrong. That's cool. All right, cool. So we've got Ember deployed and Rails close to deployed. So what else do we want to do? I mean, geez, we're already way ahead of the game. Like, we've got our applications deployed to production. Like, what else do we need to do at this point? Well, it can be great to set up continuous integration, which is going to be a tool that's going to, if you haven't used continuous integration before, the real agile nerds have very strong opinions about what continuous integration means. But in the general parlance, what a CI server means is it's something that runs your tests and other checks to make sure your code is still working right, whether it's on the master branch or on a pull request you've set up. I'm going to be using CircleCI.com, but there's several other good continuous integration tools as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and log in here. And here's how we set it up. First, before I do this, a service outage. Interesting. Lucky thing I can log in. So before we do this, there's not much for a CI system to do unless you've got tests to run. But luckily, Rails and Ember both have really strong test integration built in. And so we can run those. Let's see if bin rspec works for me, at least, in the Rails application. rspec is a very popular Ruby and Rails testing tool, so that's what my API up sets up for us. So we can run it. It's not checking much right now other than just the fact that rspec is running, but even that is good to set up, to know that our application is set, so that as we add new features in, we're set to go. When we run bin rspec locally, we get the test run, and it says there's one example that passed and there were 0 failures, so it's fine. We can run test for Ember as well. So let's switch over. Ember test is going to run, and it's just going to take a minute to spin up that JavaScript there to make sure it works. So we'll see that go, and maybe we'll come back to that in a second. So once we have our test working, we can get things set up to run automatically using continuous integration. So on CircleCI here, once you create your free account, you can click on the left-hand side, Add Projects. And let me just zoom in a bit so you can see it. So we click Add Projects. When it's connected to GitHub, it sees them. And you see, we can see Ideas Ember and Ideas API. Does it think it sees them already? Yeah, because I set up project with those names before. So let me unfollow those projects so we can re-add them so you can see it. Unfollow stop building is what I want. This is my little bit of setup. Ideas API. Settings, stop building. All right, now we're starting from a clean slate. So we say add projects. Okay, so Ideas Ember and Ideas API, they both say setup project. So we can click on setup project. We'll start with Rails first. And it's going to give you some help. So you need a config YML file to tell CircleCI how to run your tests. Is it JavaScript? Is it Python? Is it Haskell? What is it? And so they have a bunch of suggestions for you for setups. So you can copy and paste this config file, but we don't actually need to do that in our case because my setup scripts will set up CircleCI configs for you. So they're already set to go. So all we really need to do is say start building because your CircleCI config is ready for you. If you look into the Ember app and the API app, you can see that CircleCI config is there, pulling in a Ruby image or pulling in a Node image, and we're set to go. So we can just say start building. We'll see if this works correctly. So it says success. Ideas API is starting. So while it's even running, let's go back into here. Let's add a project. Ideas Ember. Set it up. Click Start Building. So these are both queued and they're going to run. So while those are going, we'll go back and check on Ember running locally. And it says that it's run 11 tests. They've all passed and none have failed. So this is running a linter to check linting on a bunch of these files, and so they're all good to go. So that's great. So hopefully up on the CI server, these will pass as well. And we saw just as I was talking there that in 30 seconds, the Rails tests finished and passed. We can click into here to see them. We can scroll down and see this list of steps that CI ran through. And as we're looking through running tests, we can see terminal output for all of these that looks just like our local terminal output. So that's how we can see what's happening. And certainly if a test fails, we can check in the CI user interface to see what failed on them. Looking at Ember, JavaScript's got to be slower. So JavaScript's running slower, and it's checking things out here. So that will pass once we're done. So now we've taken the tests that Rails and Ember have already provided for us, and we've spun them up on CircleCI for us. So this is one of the benefits of using a batteries included framework like this. If you're using a lower level framework, you would have to set up testing yourself, figure out frameworks, integrate them, decide the approach you want to take to even get to the point where you have any tests that you would want to run. But Ember and Rails have got those ready for you. They're right, and with my little setup script that I added on there, just doing a tiny bit of work, they're set to send up to CI to get you have full test coverage from the start. So that's really great, and we'll just give Ember some more time here as we go. The other big step we want to do as we're working on here is to add dependency, Dependabot. So CircleCI is not only going to run when we when we have commits to master, it's going to run on our PRs as well. And let me just show you the config for that, because I think there's also oh, we got an error. Testum not loaded. This looks like a temporary error. So hopefully these things don't happen too often in your test. These things only happen on live streams. They don't happen locally. Hopefully random sporadic errors don't happen too often, but if they do, it's a great learning experience here. You can click rebuild to retry them from start and see if it was a one-time thing or if there's an ongoing problem. So we'll just conveniently change the topic from that right now to go on to something else. If you go to your project, you can click on the configuration here. And this has a bunch of different settings. So some of the settings I want to do, I always do them as the very basics whenever I start up a new project in CircleCI. Unfortunately, they're under advanced settings. I don't find them particularly advanced. So what you can do here is only build pull requests. So check out this description. By default, we will build all the commits for this project. Once turned on, we will only build branches that have associated pull requests open. But for your default branch, we'll always build all commits. Ben says, sounds like you need to feed the demo gods. That's totally true. If you think this is embarrassing, you should have seen me at my very first conference talks and see just how I had to fall back on the pre-prepared slides to make them work. So the deal here, only build pull requests. So by default, if you just push up a branch to GitHub because it's temporary, you want to save it up there, it'll build the test for that as well. And maybe your tests aren't passing on your branch. I don't usually want to do that, and I don't kind of like to save on them from having to run unnecessary tests. So let's just say only build pull requests. So this means my master branch, it'll build. And then on any pull requests, when those get pulled up, CI will run on those as well. And we're going to see that starting next week when we push up pull requests to add in new features. The other setting I said is auto cancel redundant builds. So we will automatically cancel any queued or running builds on a branch where a newer build is triggered on the same branch. So basically, if you push up a branch for a pull request and it's running the test, but then you go ahead and push up new commits on it as well, then CircleCI is just going to cancel your previous build and start the new one because we already know it's out of date. So that's a useful setting to set as well. Auto cancel redundant builds. It just keeps things running more quickly and saves on unnecessary testing resources. So it looks like Ember might have failed again. No, it passed. Look, check that out. So again, hopefully that kind of flake doesn't happen often. Certainly in Ember, I don't experience that much. So that seems like that's probably a one-time thing. So let's go into the settings for Ideas API as well. Into our settings, our advanced settings. Only build pull requests and auto cancel redundant builds. And this is auto save for me as I change these, so that's good to go. So when we have a pull request come up, our tests are automatically going to run. So Dependabot is the last piece of this puzzle to set things up really great and really professionally for free. So we want to go and create a Dependabot account, which basically just means authenticating to GitHub, and then we say add repos. So Dependabot is going to see a bunch of repos that I have, and I can add in two at once, Ideas API and Ideas Ember, and it's automatically detected that those are Ruby and JavaScript in particular. Dependabot needs to know about the language you're using because it needs to know the dependencies that you're actually using, the dependency setups, to know to look in a gem file for Ruby or run a package.json for a node to be able to build things. So we say add selected. It says daily bumping enabled. We also kicked off an initial bump now, so keep an eye out for pull requests. So let's find them in the list here. We can see checking now, hold tight. And so this is actually, I don't really consult the Dependabot UI very much at all. And the reason why is because everything you need is going to come into GitHub for you. So let me just open up this in Hub Browse. So when I open up my Ember application here, ID is Ember, any of my personal pull requests that I make will show up in here in the pull request. And so I'm going to see and get email notifications for dependencies that Dependabot finds as well that's updating it. So that's all there is to see right now. There's not much else to see until the next time that a dependency update comes in. Luckily for JavaScript applications, there's a lot of dependencies, and so probably by next week, we'll see some Dependabot dependencies that have come in here for Ember, and I'm going to maybe leave at least one of them open so we can see it and merge it down together next week. We'll be back again next Friday to do this stream. So that's pretty much it. So let's review what we have here together. So we've done a bunch of stuff, and it's involved very little coding so far. And certainly if you're a first-time developer, this could be very overwhelming. And so there's great tutorials on all these tools, and I really recommend starting with a tutorial that says, hey, I just want to learn Ember, or I just want to learn Rails. And that would work out really great. So we're targeting a bit more for intermediate level, assuming you built web applications before. We're laying the groundwork that I would lay on my real projects to get a project started. I'm using these high-level frameworks, Ember and Rails, that keep me very productive. I'm using my setup scripts, API up and Ember up, to spin up the projects with my kind of standard dependencies. And just as a quick side note on that, I recommend creating scripts like this for yourself if you do a lot of side projects and just kind of playing around in code. Or if you're working at a job where you have a number of different systems built up rather than just one. If you're creating projects every couple of months, it can be a good idea to script out your standard tech stack so you can start from there. Even if you review it each time, even if you make tweaks as you go, it's nice to document it so you don't have to figure out again, like, how did I get Mocha and Sign-On Chai working together with Ember again? I forget. Like, script that stuff and make it efficient for you. Just as a minor thing, we set up the hub command locally in the project to make it easier to work with GitHub. And we tried to deploy to Heroku for my application, we tried to deploy, we successfully deployed to Netlify for Ember on the front end and Rails on the back end. We got CircleCI running, and again, this is something we have a little bit less visibility into so far, but CircleCI is going to test, every time we have a new commit to master, it's going to make sure that that my tests still succeed. And every time that a new dependency comes out, Dependabot is going to check and see if my test, it's going to create a new PR for it, and it's going to show me if my application still works with the latest and greatest dependencies to make sure that I've got security, all the latest security updates and latest features, and keep things fresh. So that's the setup that we have. If you haven't used some of these tools before, I would definitely check them out because they're great to use for side projects or for professional stuff. Just because you're working on the side doesn't mean you don't want to have these things in place because you can still break things and have your application not work. And so having tests in place to keep things moving forward in a good way is something that I really value. And if you know me at all, you know that testing is going to be a big part of what we do going forward. I want to do a plug before we get going, a couple plugs. One of them is for a service called Embercasts. So I have used this service before to learn. It's a screencast for Ember, as you might imagine, but it's full stack screencasts. And so they will teach you Ember with a different framework on the back end of your choice. One of them is with Rails, and of course Rails is the one I'd recommend. So if you want something more formal and more step-by-step than this screencast, I would definitely recommend you check out Embercasts. It's $4.99 right now. Sometimes sales come up, so you could follow them on Twitter and keep an eye out for that. But if you want to get really set up for Rails or Ember development or for full stack development in general, you can't do any better than Embercasts for a full stack instruction. So I really highly recommend it. The other place you could go is the Frontier. So I work at Big Nerd Ranch. We do web development and mobile application development for iOS and Android, as well as we teach one-week boot camps and we write best-selling Big Nerd Ranch guides. And so the Frontier is another service we have. It's screencasts on various different technologies for intermediate developers. So let me actually find, I've done a bunch of screencasts in here, so let me kind of find those. Testing, no. Where, I should have save my links. Here we go. Ruby on Rails. Let me find my screencast set up here. Rails APIs. So this is a service that I did diving into Rails APIs, how to build an API as quickly as possible. So the Frontier is something you could check out. You can sign up for a certain number of days free. Let's see, free month when signing up. To get a free month of our screencasts. And then certainly if you're looking for any web application development or 1-week developer boot camps, we'd love to have you check it out. We also do, we are hiring right now. And so if you are looking to get work as a JavaScript developer or as a native developer, we'd love to have you join. So check out Big Nerd Ranch about careers to join us. So that's about it for this week. Thank you so much for joining. I've had a lot of fun. I love these tools. I was a little embarrassed by not getting Rails working, so you can be sure I'm going to be obsessively fixing that right now to make sure I can get that working and that doesn't happen again. But I'm really glad you're here. Check me out live in future weeks, or check out the recording as we go to kind of follow along and catch up with us as we're building out this application from scratch. I really think that if you're a front-end developer, I think you'll be really surprised at how efficient Rails can make you to be able to build out your own custom back-end so you don't need to rely on a third-party service. And if you're a back-end developer, I think you're going to find that Ember allows you to get some really rich front-end interactions with your user without needing to write a bunch of stuff from scratch. So check out Rails and Ember. I think they're really great tools. I'm obsessed with them. Even though I don't always use them day-to-day on my client projects, I can't stay away from them for my personal work, and I highly recommend them. I think they'd be great for any business or any personal learning. So if you want to follow along with me, you can follow me on Twitch at Coding It Wrong. You can follow me on Twitter at Coding It Wrong as well. I'm Coding It Wrong just about anywhere you can find me. And another place you can go, Ember has a Discord chat. And so I'm on there on real time, so you can message me on there. I'm Josh Justice, I believe, on Discord. So there's a link to the Ember Discord in the notes down below the stream and below the recording. So join on the Ember Discord. Let me know your thoughts on Rails and on Ember, JSON API. Let me know what kind of things you like to get into this screencast, and I'm just excited to dig into it with you. So thanks so much for joining. Thanks for the folks that joined in the chat, to Ben and GN Fisher MVD. We really appreciate it. So love for anyone else to say hello in the chat in the future. I'd love to entertain your questions as we go. So thanks for joining. We'll catch you next time. Let's go to the slide. See ya.